All right. I know there's a lot of excitement in this room, so I think it's time to actually get the town hall going. This is the first, if you like, it's called CEO Town Hall. It's probably inappropriate. It's the real UHN's town hall for all of us. So we're going to kick it off today between myself, the interim CEO, also the CMO, together with my twin, you guys know, Mike Nader. So we are going to cover our two major areas, and then we will see how the feedback is from the town hall, and the intention is to actually have a whole series of these on an ongoing basis, with the other EVP portfolio being integrated in the future town hall. So thanks all of you, both either joining here in person at Michener, and also for those of you who are streaming it and who is online. And we are also going to be taping it, and we will be putting it on our web. Now, to kick off today's meeting, there's two major recognition of the day. The first one, International Women's Day. And how appropriate, yeah, thank you. So how appropriate that we actually are hosting this at Michener. Because you all know, and especially for those of you who have a strong tie with Michener, that Michener was founded by Diana Michener Schatz, and the daughter of the Governor General Michener. And she actually, I think, started her career at Toronto General, worked in our lab medicine program back then, and realized the needs of creating an institute like Michener. And that was in the Michener history forever. And she still come to a lot of the award ceremony and so on and so forth. So I think we have to thank Diana, otherwise this wouldn't be possible. So roll the clock forward to 2018, and there's always a risk to single out certain prominent women amongst us. Catherine Wang, who is here, and also Dr. Gallery Sader, I believe tonight would be hosting they are the panel from UHN at J Labs over at the Mars building, and in celebration of International Women's Day. So congratulations. Okay, so for those of you who are participating either in person or especially those who are online, we have learned from Dr. Sader's town halls that this is probably an effective way of polling the audience, both to pose your question, and we would also probably try to use it as a way, if we needed to poll all of you. Now, in terms of today's agenda, so I'm going to kick off. 2017 has been quite a ups and downs years for us. I think we started off the year just like this year. The winter of 2016 and 17 was terrible. Our emergency were flooded with patients, and we were always in overcapacity. And back then, we actually did not really have very much of a formal overcapacity protocol. So what we learned from the early part of 2017, and that was what the bulk of work that a lot of the clinical folks have been working on, was to actually formalize an overcapacity protocol, which we rolled out in the second half of 2017. We are still not good at it yet. We are beginning also to learn what are some of the gaps. Clearly, I think Mike would comment more during some of the town hall presentation, is we now realize it's more than just opening beds, it's more than just trying to bring in more nursing staff. We really need to actually have the entire team sort of beef up, surge up, if you like, beyond the physical capacity, because otherwise people is going to have to prioritize. Do you take care of the sick patients coming in, or do you focus on the patients who need to finish off their care so that we can actually free up the beds to bring in more patients? And so I think the teams are being stretched in different directions, and certainly the last 2 months has been extremely challenging. And for all of you who have lived through it, thank you on behalf of all the patients that you've cared for. In terms of the CEO transition, which is why I'm here, that was also, you can say that that was a bit of a low point for us in the summer of 2017, when we found out that our previous CEO Dr. Peter Pister got his dream job at MD Anderson. And who could blame him, who spent 20 years at MD Anderson to take on that role? So I understand that Peter is doing well. MD Anderson is going through their transformation. And you guys have to put up with this guy for the last 5 months. And I can tell you that very, very soon, the announcement of the new CEO will be coming out. I can't promise you what date it is, but it would be before the next town hall. So in terms of what we have been doing also during 2017 was, if you remember, in the first half of the 2017, we rolled out Caring Safely, and the good part of it is we are going to hit our target of 75% of our staff have completed the training. And that includes some of the medical staff. Thank you to Dr. Baker for taking the lead, and Fayez Qureshi, who is our surgical lead, to really get us over that 75% staff across UHN. So we look forward to 2018 to bring along the other 25%. Now we have reached the threshold. 3 out of 4 have done it. If you are the only one that's left, we're going to pull you into the tent. And obviously, the team now has to work on, okay, those are our people who are on the ground with us in 2017 and 18. But every single day, we have people who are joining us. And plus, we have never been focusing yet on the trainees. So that's the work for 2018 and 19 to go forward. Looking back on 2017, we also spent the first half of the year heavily focused on our development of our strategic themes, or the beginning of a strategic plan. And it would be fair to say that, as soon as the CEO transition started, it would only be fair to pause that strategic themes. So a lot of you have contributed to the strategic themes. We have now posted on our corporate strategic plan website. This is to recognize all the contributions that you've all made in the various areas that are thematic area for the new CEO and also the new executive team to reflect on it during 2019. So the work is not done, but I think the work that has been done has been very important and defined the foundation. In terms of the foundational work that has been approved by the board and what UHN is going through over the last 5 months or so, and we will continue to actually focus on, are listed as following. We know we need to do better in terms of our financial accounting so that we have real data in a timely fashion that we can actually plan and both for all our activities. So finance is going through financial transformation. We know that we have close to about $500 million in terms of facility revitalization that's needed. And that's why there's an RFP going out there in terms of the master facility planning. Without a proper master facility planning, we were not in position to go to the ministry for any of the major capital asks for the next 5 to 10 years. You need to have one. So we must do it, and that's why that would be the work for most of 2018. There's a lot of clinical work that needs to continue to actually improve and get better in order for us to actually deliver better work, and that will be part of Mike's presentation. But just to put it into perspective, throughout 2017, at a very top level, and these are the stuff that I've told our board, I've told the Premier, I've also told the opposition party, whoever wants to listen, with the help of OHA. For UHN, we saw 4% more patients through our emergency room compared to the year before. We admitted 2% more inpatient to all our units across all our sites at UHN. We carried out 2% more surgical procedure than the year before. But we did all of that with 2% fewer inpatient beds. So basically it meant there has been a net 4% increase in the clinical workload that everyone has to carry in order to take care of all those patients. And we are going to close our year with more or less the same budget compared to last year because we were able to close those beds. We have gone too far, and that's what we have been telling all our payer and also the funders. So now for 18 and 19, it's now time to look at where do we actually put back in to repair and put it in the right way, staff it in the right way, so that we are better prepared. And for most of you who realize that summer of 2017 did not give us any breathing room. Actually, the activities did not go down. I just gave you all the stats. And so I'm counting on it that 2018, it's not going to slow down either. And then how do we prepare for the winter of 2018? Feels pretty cold out there today, right? Now, and then the other part of it is that in terms of research finance, we have gone through major work. And the research organization, in terms of the organizational structure, Brett Waters has also led significant reorganization to actually make the research financial services and research operation services much more efficient and going forward to support all of us with the research. And under Brian's capable role, I think Michener and the educational portfolio has grown and flourished, and we have taken on more responsibility, like the Personal Support Worker Registry on behalf of the ministry, doing very important work in an area that actually has not been well attended to. Last but not least, digital roadmap, everyone has been waiting for transformation. And the good part of it is that the ministry is finally recognizing it is important. So actually at 1 o'clock, there will be the first conference called Dusker. You're going to represent us for a while. Is that now the ministry is finally reaching out to find how much are we actually spending on digital. They're probably going to figure out the way, not to fund us more to take care of it, but probably not to harm us. This is my read of the situation. Is that if we are going to make any significant investment in digital, instead of going into our cost per weighted case, which is going to make us look very inefficient as we're going through it, there's enough lobbying that's been going on over the last 2 to 3 years to say, take that out of the equation. That should be seen as a one-time capital investment, and otherwise you're not benchmarking hospital at the same level playing field. So we are fully expected with that philosophical change at the ministry level, it will help us align what our digital team has been planning on to say beyond just getting some of the fundamental stuff going, how do we actually make the proper investment into the clinical side, corporate side, research and education. So stay tuned, and I think our April town hall will mainly focus on the digital transformation. So I'm not going to, at this point, go into those other areas. I'm going to hand it over to Mike, and then once Mike is finished, the two of us will sit over here and ready to take on any question. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. It's great to see so many people being able to come out and join us today. I did want to acknowledge that I know that there are a number of folks who couldn't be with us today because when we are in a situation of overcapacity level 3 and 4, we have a 12:15 bed meeting. So many of our staff, I think certainly at Toronto General today, are at that bed meeting because they're trying to focus on our primary value, which is the needs of our patients come first. So I just want to acknowledge that as we move forward. We have had a very, very difficult month of January, February, and into March. It has been very challenging for all of our care teams. The emergency rooms have absolutely been swamped in terms of activity, and we know we've seen that pressure extend into the inpatient units, into our rehab areas, and all throughout the system. And I just want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication that our staff have undertaken to care for the needs of our patients. It's been extremely difficult, and we know that. I certainly see it every day on my dashboard. I used to joke that I enjoyed when I was blissfully ignorant and didn't know what was going on every day, but I see it every day. Every 5 minutes my dashboard gets refreshed and I know exactly what's happening in the organization. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to acknowledge the hard work of the teams. I'm going to start with just a high-level overview of the healthcare system. This isn't a theoretical presentation, but I wanted to set the context of what we've been doing and where we've been working within this context. So, of course, as we all know, the foundation of health is healthy living, focusing on prevention, and then when people need diagnosis and treatment and recovery and home care, that all occurs, and it's in a broader system. And across the country, we know that we have three main streams of work that occur. We have the primary care work, we have acute care, and we have post-acute rehab and community care. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for the healthcare system is that each of these areas operate somewhat independently of one another, and the transitions are not seamless for us. So what I thought I would do is just talk briefly about some of the work that we're doing in each of these streams. And the wonderful thing about UHN is we actually are operating in each of these different streams. So when we think of primary care and the work that has been underway in the primary care arena, we've done some extraordinary work in terms of this area. The Toronto Western Hospital, for example, has been leading a lot of work with their family health teams. We opened up last year the Garrison Creek family health team and the teams that are there. And this was really led by Jan Newton, Jan Lackstrom, and a number of leaders at the Toronto Western. And this is going to be crucially important for us as we continue to try and manage the demands on the acute care setting and the rehab setting, because the more we can focus on the prevention and healthy living through primary care supports for patients, residents, and clients, the better we're going to be in terms of the work that we do. In addition, we have the SCOPE services, which is the Seamless Care Optimizing the Patient Experience, which is an interprofessional team that focuses on supporting solo family care practitioners. This wraps care and teams around them to ensure that patients can receive the services that they need out in the community, and that the primary care physicians can receive the supports that they need. This work was led by Dr. Pauline Pariser, who has been working with many of our community partners and is in fact the Toronto Western sub-region LIN lead, or something of that effect in terms of the work, sub-LIN work. So where are we going? Continued investment in family health teams. We know that the population in Toronto has been growing and is growing rapidly. You just need to look at the condos that are going up. We also know that the Kensington Chinatown area has the highest rate of low urgency emergency visits, and they're coming to many of our sites. So we do need to focus on more family health teams and family health support to try and reduce the burden on the acute care system. So I'll move into the acute care, and obviously this is where we do a lot of our work here at UHN. As I said earlier, has been an extremely difficult time for us as we move forward. We've had a very heavy flu season, and at the same time as the patients who we're caring for are experiencing illness, our staff are also experiencing illness. And so we struggle with the double whammy of increased activity at the same time as we're dealing with higher sick times. So obviously our emergency rooms have been very, very busy. I just looked at my dashboard. We have 20 admissions in the Toronto General ED with 17 CTAS-2s waiting to be seen. And so that has been a trend over the last couple of weeks, and it's been extremely difficult for those teams trying to care for the patients. And likewise, that feeds into higher activity in amongst our surgical and our medical units. And, you know, Charlie talked about some of the percentage numbers, but to set context for you, we had days over the last couple of weeks where we had 111 more patients than we had budgeted for. So that really sets the context of why we are experiencing such challenges and such difficulty in terms of caring for our patients. Because sure, we opened up the beds. It's not like we were restricting that. We opened the beds, but the real challenge for us was our care teams were now trying to care for these individuals at the same time as new individuals are coming in, at the same time as we're trying to discharge. And so what tends to happen is we become very inefficient in our discharge processes because we're caring for those who have the greatest need. And I had the absolute honor to shadow a number of our care staff. I shadowed Dr. Robert Wu and Peter Cram and saw the work that they did. I shadowed a couple of our nurses, one on the multi-organ transplant unit and in the ICU, and I could see exactly how busy everybody is. And so I absolutely recognize that and know there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So the challenge that we face in Ontario is we have about 2.4 beds for every 1,000 people in our province. And that is amongst the lowest of any OECD country and amongst the lowest in Canada. And so that presents a challenge for us. And certainly people might say, actually, that's very good because we want to care for people out in the community. But it doesn't help us in the immediacy of what we're dealing with. And so we are dealing with capacity and demand pressures. We are dealing with a growing population and a population that is aging at the exact same time. And we know that we have emergency and flow pressures that are compounding that. And I think everyone will know that we have throughout our hospitals off-service patients who are located in beds where they're not necessarily able to be cared for in the best way because it's a medicine patient sitting on a surgical unit or a medicine patient sitting on a cardiac unit. So what are we doing about it? Charlie talked about the caring safely work that's happening. We have activity focused on huddles and our hospital-acquired conditions. That's intended to help us ensure that our patients are not staying in hospital longer than they need to. That's intended to try and reduce the impact of negative adverse events on those patients. And I want to share just a little story with you of one of the benefits associated with this. We had a patient who was being transferred using a ceiling lift at one of our sites. As they lifted the patient, the lift broke and the patient fell. Now, fortunately, the patient landed on the bed, but through that process, the team identified that there was a failure point in the lift. This information was shared at the site huddle. It got reported across the network, and we were able to identify a number of other lifts that had this similar problem. We were able to address it immediately. That's wonderful. Meets the values, our core value in terms of the needs of our patients coming first. So what else have we been doing? As you know, the ministry announced in October the funding for additional surge beds. So they gave us funding for 30 additional beds. But as I just reported earlier, when we're opening up 111 more beds, it's a significant challenge for us to move forward. But that was certainly something that was helpful. We're hopeful that this funding will continue, and in fact was announced by the health minister that this funding would continue in some form or matter moving forward into the next year. We also have been advocating quite strongly with the LHIN and the ministry, and we're happy to say that they've heard us in regards to the demand associated with ICU beds. And so we've received word that they are going to fund us for 8 more ICU beds, which is wonderful. Unfortunately, it's only until the end of June, but we'll take it where we can get it, and we'll continue to advocate for the increased capacity for us as we move forward. So when we talk about off-service patients and some of the challenges associated with off-service patients, one of the pieces of work that's underway right now is the bed map. And so the bed map is really intended for us to take a look at our utilization of beds, where patients are being placed, and how we might ensure that we have the most appropriate patient in the most appropriate bed. And so that's a big piece of work that will be moving forward in the next fiscal year as we move forward. We have lots of other work in terms of other expansions. The team at Princess Margaret is leading the stem cell cancer expansion. That's a massive piece of work that is really, really important. Marnie and Mary G over at Princess Margaret are driving that piece of work moving forward. And then the other thing that we've done is we've looked at, through the bed map, some preliminary data in regards to our bed capacity. And so what we've decided to do is take all of the savings that we realized through the management review and the restructuring that was associated with that, and we're going to be opening up permanently 10 more additional beds at the Toronto General Hospital to specifically deal with the issues of ED congestion in the ED. So we have, on average, 14 admitted patients in the emergency room at Toronto General at midnight census. So with those 10 additional beds, we anticipate, we're hoping, that through that midnight census, we would expect to see that 90% of the time we would be at OCP 1 or less, that is less than 10 admitted patients in the ED at TG. So we're really, really hopeful that that will help us moving forward. In the area of post-acute rehab and community care, we have a lot of work that's been underway. Really credits to Sue Jewell, Talia Wolf, Marnie Weber, Leslie Wiley, Margaret Liu, Stuart Dankner, and the team at St. Elizabeth for the opening and reactivation of our Hillcrest facility. We opened the facility on December 11th. For the first couple of weeks, we only had about 6 patients in the clients in the facility, but in the first 2 weeks of January, we ballooned up, and we've been at about 65 or 70 clients in this facility. This facility is intended as a transitional care space for clients who may be directed to or heading towards long-term care, but through reactivation, we're able to shift their trajectory away from long-term care and shift them back home. And the team has done a great job. Last I had heard, we had discharged, I think, 20 or 25 patients from the cluster, and the facility was full. Where are we going? We have some work to do, and certainly the TC Lynn and the ministry has some work to do in regards to the need for long-term care beds, particularly within the Toronto Central Lynn. We know that the Toronto Central Lynn is underbedded compared to other Lynns in Ontario, and I heard on the radio a couple months back that the Toronto Star was reporting that there were 14 long-term care facilities that were at risk of leaving Toronto by virtue of the renovations that they needed to do to meet the new standards, as well as the land value and the profitability for them to sell the facility and then move to another jurisdiction. So we've been working with the Lynn on how we can ensure that that does not happen, because you could imagine that if that occurs, the ALC numbers within our acute care facilities will be very, very high, and that would be very challenging for us to continue to provide the care needs. The good news is the province announced that they will be opening up 5,000 new long-term care beds in the next 4 years, and we're working with the Lynn to try and ensure that a number of those beds land in the Toronto Central area. So really what we're trying to do as UHN is shift away from the silos, the vertical silos that we see in primary care, acute care, post-acute rehab, and community care, to create a seamless continuum of care that will allow our patients, our clients, and residents to shift from the primary care system into our acute care system, into the post-acute rehab and community care system, back home to healthy living. So that's what we're trying to create at the very highest level as an organization, and look forward to talking about that more with you. So we're going to end the feedback of information this way. We're looking forward to your questions. The pollev@.com/UHN Town Hall 954. You can go in, it's quite cool. You can ask your questions, you can upvote things, you can downvote them. And so we will start with answering some of those questions.
So for those of you who are here in person, there will be 2, maybe up to 3 roaming mic, so that others can hear you. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and one of these capable individuals will run it up to you in a very safe way.
So we have Aubrey on the right here. Marianne will be up and down this row, and myself, Matthew, I will be here, and fielding questions back and forth between the audience as well as PolEV as well. So to kick things off, why don't we go to PolEV, and we'll actually jump to the top question if we can. Has the work with EY and their operational review been completed as of yet? And how are we tracking and or recouping the money spent on their services?
So maybe Mike, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So we ended the contract or the agreement with Ernst & Young. It would have been fall of last year. Because they had completed their work. We were shifting the focus of the operational review to an internal team. Obviously, it's very expensive to engage consultants to do this work. We believe that we have the capacity and the capability within our internal team. So what we did was we announced, as you know, the formation of the Office of Stewardship and Sustainability. We seconded a number of members into that team. And we created an internal team that was going to focus on achieving the savings. Ernst & Young identified in excess of 200 savings initiatives for us to focus on. We haven't finished implementing all of those 200 savings initiatives. but the OSS is working through them now diligently with the team. And we did recoup. So one of the first initiatives that we implemented was focusing on preferred accommodation. And so the fees that we paid EY, we were able to regain those fees through preferred accommodation revenues in the first year of the process. So it was a worthwhile investment to help us identify opportunities, and I think it's been successful. OSS is continuing to work with the clinical teams and others to find savings.
So maybe I'll take a couple of the questions that are related to the CEO search. The CEO, I think that there must have been a misinformation out there. The CEO search committee, right from the get-go, actually included a patient partner. I don't recall the name, but I think Emma can certainly, if needed be. But there was a patient partner on the search committee. That was right from the get-go. There was a related question, I thought I saw it earlier. How do we make sure that the CEO is committed to a publicly funded healthcare system and will not jump ship when a for-profit American private hospital? So, I mean, this is always a challenge. I mean, you know, I'm sure the search committee as well as the UHM board would do everything and have done everything in its power to make sure that whoever we sign on as CEO is totally committed to our system. And for that, not in any way I'm defending our previous CEO, Peter Pfister. I think he had every single intention to commit it to a publicly funded system at UHM. It was, let's face it, it was a struggle for Peter for a good period of time because he grew up in a privately funded system. So there was a steep learning for him. But that, I think his departure was not so much publicly funded versus privately funded structure. It was basically his dream job that became available. Because at the time when he left MD Anderson, they had a relatively brand new CEO. And there was no prediction that that person was being kicked out during the time when Peter was here. So you have my reassurance, and I have the highest confidence that our UHM board has every intention when the new CEO is announced that it is someone who is committed to a publicly funded system. So maybe we should go back and forth, right? Looks like Mary Ann Neary is ready to go. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Charlie, and thank you both for very good introductory slides to open the discussion. My question was about you mentioning that we're effectively providing 4% more care with the same budget or less, and you've conveyed this to the ministry. Do we know what that's going to look like? Are the 8 additional beds to the end of June in ICU or the continuance of the MOH beds, are those indications of what that might look like, or is it going to be more structured?
So I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the part that's going to save us for 2018 is an election year. So anytime when there's an election year, you can always look back. There will be, budget is going to be announced March 28th. So I cannot predict that, but I have a strong feeling that within the budget there will be a little bit for everyone, and especially given the trouble of the winter of 2017-18, there is no way, and I could be totally wrong, but there's no way that they could not pay some attention to properly funding healthcare. So officially, what we, amongst all the hospitals of Ontario, 130, have put forward to both the Premier and to the Health Minister before he jumped ship, was that we are asking for 4.5% increase in our operating budget for 18-19. Last year we got about 1.5%, just as an idea. And we are also asking for a net 1% increase for all the Ontario hospital towards capital, which we have never received. Because we have gone through, every hospital has gone through significant capital and digital deferred maintenance for the last 6 to 7 years. And we just have gone too far. So my strong suspicion, Mary Ann, is they won't come in at 4.5. We may get 2.5 to 3. We may or may not get our capital. My strong suspicion, there will be a bit of wiggle room in terms of the surge bed that the hospital have received during the winter of 17-18. Probably there's a very good chance it will probably roll into the base. This is my prediction. And there will be further plan for maybe another surge in 18-19 winter. In terms of the ICU bed, Mike and I will do everything we can, because that's more UHN phenomena, and we'll do everything we can to sort of push beyond June 30th. And so to that extent, actually, Jill Howard and I went with the OHA folks to meet with some of the opposition party, including Francis Jonas, who is the health critic from the NDP. We don't know who to talk to with the PC yet, let's be honest about it. I don't want to talk to Ford yet at this point. But the bottom line is, the messaging is the same for the ruling party and whoever's going to come in, and our position is very clear. Healthcare is the business of all three parties, and we need all your voices in the legislature to make sure we do the right thing and we do put patients first. So.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add is we know that there are certain areas that we're growing extremely fast in. So the multi-organ transplant, for example, there was a tweet that went out, I retweeted it. We are now the largest transplant center in North America. And so we need to ensure that we are planning for the growth that we have been seeing. That would involve additional critical care beds. It would involve the need for additional inpatient beds, and so we're working on the business case associated with that right now.
Yeah. So maybe we should go back. Looks like the 21st century healthcare.
Heinz 57.
Heinz 57. So are we that old?
I don't know if we're that old.
So, I mean, my analogy of our digital environment is like flying Rouge on Air Canada. So we do want to eventually go on the real airplane to fly it. For those of you who have gone through the exercise that we went through over 5 years ago, that eventually landed on a decision that we need a system-wide new EPR system, otherwise known as EPIC, and then after a lot of due diligence, it was decided that we couldn't afford it. And the main reason that I want to point out that we could not afford it was the fear that there was no acknowledgement by the ministry back in early 2015 that if we were to borrow money, if we were to raise funds from the private donors, that we're going to invest into a new digital system, that they would allow us to count that as one-time capital investment. It's not part of your operating budget. It would not go into your cost per weighted case, so that we would not be hurt by it. Because otherwise it would look like we would be wildly inefficient. And then there's this process called HBAM, that every year the ministry look at how you did 2 years ago, benchmarking against other hospitals. And if you look at like you are inefficient, guess what happened? They take the money away from you during your current year, even though it happened 2 years ago. And that happened to us once over the last 7 years. And we hated it. When you lose 16 millions, when you were counting on getting 5. So the swing for us in that one fiscal year was we lost 20, we have to find 21 million of efficiency somewhere. We lived through that concern in early 2015, and that's why the decision by the executive was, until the ministry actually clarified that we can do it as a capital investment, and looks like, as I said, the 1 o'clock conference call is the beginning to do that. Now, the other thing that has happened since then, because one of our previous CEO has been the deputy minister there for a while, and he totally gets that the IT transformation is needed throughout all the hospital system in Ontario, is that the ministry is now taking a much more proactive action, not only to encourage you to actually no longer defer your digital transformation, but kick it up a notch, and maybe allow you to actually fiscally be able to do that without penalty, is that it looks like the ministry is probably going to move towards a direction to have some kind of standardization. So instead of every single hospital trying to decide, well, which one out of the 20 or 30 vendors out there are we going to cut a deal, looks like the direction is that probably there will be a movement towards down to a final list of 3. That you are going to have to be within one of those kind of a system. And actually we are very well positioned. Is that if we clarify that financially we are not going to be hurt, UHN can always raise money. We will then be able to do the capital investment, and then we would then be able to land on the spot in terms of if there's going to be one of those final three, it would be way easier for us to decide which one do we align with. So there's, I think, but maybe, as I said, by the next town hall, we'll have a little bit more update, and I want to fly Air Canada, not Rouge. So, Mike, you want to take on another?
So to transition here from Pull EV, are there any additional questions in the audience right now? At the top?
The head of Emerge.
He said he was going to be nice.
This is just a general question. I just want to veer off a little bit, of course. Our staff are in the hospital are super stressed, the frontline workers. They're being asked for a long time now to do more with less. They cut their breaks, they come in earlier, they stay late. I think we have some strategies for staff wellness, but I think we're probably going to need to notch this up. And so I just want to get an idea of the overall principles of how we're going to help our staff continue to do the job they're doing when we're asking them to do more than less. But what are our strategies to keep them healthy, prevent attrition?
Well, that's quite a loaded question. I'm looking to our EVP of HR Resources, Emma, there. I mean, Emma, you have done a lot during your tenure at UHN, not only to rebuild our relationship with the union. You and your team have also led the UHN Employee Assistance Program, as well as our wellness program. And I think we are considered one of the better employer in terms of recognizing both union, non-union staff every year in terms of pay increases. Maybe we have more work that we need to do, that if you enter the UHN, there's a career path for you. And I think under your group, you have done a lot of work in terms of young leaders identification, some of the learning opportunities. But I think Anil's point is when people are stressed out and burned out, could we develop more strategy and more, more work in order to support them during this stressful time? So over to you.
I'm not really sure that I can add a lot more than what you said, Charlie. There are certain things that we can do, and we try to do them. I also try very much to stay attuned to suggestions from staff that I get, for example, on Ask Emma. Anything that staff tell me, and sometimes they do talk about being stressed due to the volume of work. But I don't really get any suggestions of anything that we could do that we have not already put in place. I'm very receptive, but I'm not sure that I can give you like a great answer as to what else we could do. I think a lot of it has to do with what Mike said with regards to the volumes that we are getting, because most of the complaints or the issues that I hear are very much focused on certain areas of the hospital.
So I think Emily raised her hand and Mike raised her hand. See, this is how you bring the whole team along, is that the CEO should not and cannot have all the answers. So I kick-started. Please jump in. Emily.
So I just want to say from a safety perspective, anytime that our staff and our leaders are in a stressful situation, such as we are in now with the sheer number of patients we're dealing with, the acuity that we're dealing with, one of the things that we've tried to do, which I hope will help, is provide our staff through the education curriculum in Caring Safely with these error prevention tools, so that when they're really stressed and there is no time, you feel like you're rushing, at least you know what are the things that you can do to keep your patients safe. So that's one thing. The other thing I just want to comment from a communication and leadership perspective is not only that our leaders went through a similar type of process with the leadership modules and how do they develop an environment within the system, within our hospital to support our staff and communication within our staff, but it's how they run those things like huddles and create the ability for our staff to have the environment to actually speak up about things they're concerned about so that they can be fixed, so that these are not things that are constantly in our staff's minds, such as, a ceiling lift that is not working, or, we don't have enough staffing in this area, or we need to really focus because I'm staying up at night about something. So we're trying to help in many ways, not only with regards to all the things happening in HR, but also in the things that we're doing in Caring Safely.
Mike?
So, Anil, I think to your question, it's one of the biggest challenges that I see within the system is a misalignment of resources. So Take, for example, today at Toronto General, we have 20 admitted patients in the ED. We're caring for those patients by throwing more resources in terms of ED resources to try and address the care for those patients in a setting that is not optimal for the patients. So some of the work that we're doing with the bed map, as you know, is intended to ensure that the patients are in the right setting with the right care team so that they can address it. There's a question up here just talking about we're studying skill mix for nursing. This is a piece of work that Joy Richards and Karen Martin are leading to look at the acuity of our patients across all of our inpatient units so that we understand what the acuity is and what the level of skill mix needs to be and the staffing needs to be on those units. And so I'm very confident that by doing some of this work, we can begin to identify where we have gaps and where we need to make investment, and so that we will then identify what level of investment needs to be made. So as you know, the conversation around the opening of the 10 beds, we did that through the preliminary work associated with the bed map. We saw very clearly, I mean, everybody would say, well, we could have told you that anyway, but at least we had some data to tell us how many beds did we need to open to be able to do the decant. So we're using some of the data, and it's been very difficult. And I think everybody knows that our systems are challenged, and it's very challenging for us to get the data that we need to help us make decisions. But we're getting there, and we're starting to get more and more data to help us move things along. So much of the work that we're going to be doing and have been doing over the last year and will continue to do is going to be predominantly focused on making sure that we have the right patient in the right location for the right amount of time receiving the best care.
And maybe I'll follow up to Mike's point. I think at the end of the day, I think when you are all stressed out at the end of a shift where you have already pushed beyond your boundary, then I think you would go home to try to actually, try to recover. The thing that you probably dread the most is you come back to the same unit, and actually tomorrow it looks worse than when you left yesterday. And I think that's part of the work that we need to do, is to actually improve that facilitate flow, such that even though you are busy like hell, that if you know that by tomorrow when you come back, it's not like it's piled up again. Because I think this is where it drags people down, is that you don't see an end in sight. But as long as you have your peaks and you also have your valleys, then you have a chance to probably recover. So we are very in tune into that.
Just as
sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Just going to say, so just as a logistical reminder, actually, because we've had an overwhelming response and submission rate to Pull EV, it's actually full at the moment. You still have the ability to upvote, but we'll make sure through the survey that's sent out after the town hall, we can capture additional questions as well. But
So I think I've answered what we put in as the ask for the budget earlier in terms of what's gone into the ministry. I'm cautiously optimistic that 18-19 will be better than the current year that we are finishing. In terms of cuts, I'll throw it over to Mike.
Thanks, Charlie.
That's why he's my twin.
Well, so when we look at the budget for next year, using the planning assumptions that we have, we're forecasting a $40 million deficit. And so just to set the context, that is exactly what we've seen for the last 3 or 4 years. So it is the same pressure. It's a pressure associated with inflation. So it doesn't take into consideration increased demand and pressures. And the teams are actively working on how we're going to manage that challenge. We do have a lot of work that's happening through the Office of Stewardship and Sustainability in regards to supply chain savings and driving savings through our partnerships with our vendors. We've had some wonderful success in the area of the Joint Department of Medical Imaging, where Catherine and Jenny and her team had led some very solid negotiations with the vendors and managed to drive close to $1 million of savings through service contract reductions and supply reductions. We're going to do the same with the other areas, and we're going to look at driving those. So we don't know. The budget assumption, when I say $40 million deficit, assumes the increase,
1%.
the 1% increase that Charlie had referenced. So if it's different, then we could be in a better place to move us forward.
It's not 1 o'clock yet, is it?
It's not 1 o'clock. No.
So I would also just add on a little bit more in terms of cuts, in terms of staffing. You can never make a commitment that there would not be any personnel cut. But I think the overall likelihood, given the increase in the volume, if there's any kind of reduction in staffing that's needed anywhere, I fully expect that it would be just through the normal attrition rather than a significant wholesale cutting. So that's what I'll comment on. So.
Can I, there was a slide up there just around the health, the question around the health slides had no reference to education. And I just want to comment on that because fundamentally education, research, and clinical care are intimately linked to me. And so I don't see that as a separate pillar that we would throw up in the mix. What we should probably have done is shown and had education, research, and the clinical care as a kind of a Venn diagram within each of those, because we can't do one without the other at UHN. That's what makes us unique, and that's what makes us great.
And every single piece of work that Mike illustrated on the continuum of care is fully expected of us. Take the Hillcrest project as an example. It's a new model of care. So the ministry and the LHIN fully expected that we're going to learn from it, we're going to evaluate it, and then we are going to basically justify the value. If this is going to be replicated, scale up, and duplicated right across the province. So I think part of UHN as a learning health organization is fundamental to part of our system transformation. In terms of leading the finance transformation, looks like there's a lot of finance team voting on that one. Our chief financial officer, unfortunately, cannot be here. She's also dialing into that digital conference call by the ministry. Darlene Dassan is the one who is actually leading the finance transformation. Rest be assured, if there's any promises that we make to the clinical side of the house of better delivery of finance analytics, we will support that with the necessary investment in either digital, in software, and the necessary human resources. We will not be expecting you to continue to work off your Excel spreadsheet to pull all these numbers together. What we will be looking for is more integrated data platform that would allow us to have the right business intelligence in order to let us do our work. So, how about the surge peaks and better anticipate busy period?
Yeah, so we have quite a bit of work. Again, now that we've started to get more data and we can see the modeling, we're doing some work to try and be more predictive. So we have a project working with the digital team and a U of T student who's looking at predictive models to determine how much activity we might expect to see. So it's interesting when you think of unscheduled procedures or emergency room visits, you would say, you can't predict that. Well, in fact, you actually can. And if David Jaffrey would be here, he's a physicist and a mathematician, he'd tell you it's all about the numbers. And so you can actually look at it and model it and determine what you might expect to see in terms of activity. So we're doing some work to try and give us more predictive tools in real time so that we can predict and forecast what's going to happen in the next week. But practically speaking, we know what happens with our activity. We know, and we've experienced it every year since the dawn of time, that come December, January, February, March, we see massive surges in activity. And so this year, I think, was the first year where the government acknowledged that this was something that occurred, and they said, we're going to give you surge beds to deal with it. It was our first try. We haven't cracked that nut. We didn't do a great job of addressing the demand moving forward, but we'll learn from the mistakes that we made and the learnings that we have this year, and we'll do better next year.
So I think I've partially addressed the caring safety modules by stating earlier that I think the team that's responsible for the education is currently developing the module, and some of it would be probably e-learning, and some of it would be in-person learning, specifically targeting for new hires, the new leaders, and as well as our trainees. And that's a big project because that's always a high volume that's coming through. In terms of the taking step, I will take the second question about the revolving door. So this probably comes from people who actually know. Toronto Central LHIN is the worst performing LHIN within the entire Ontario system in terms of readmission. We are the worst performers. So this has drawn the attention of the TC LHIN. There's a project that's actually led by
Scott
Marnie and Scott, and there are resources that have been added, supported by the TC Lin, really trying to do a deep understanding on how we can ensure better discharges, coordinating of care in the community, so as to avoid that readmission. And that's why some of that continuum of care back into the primary care with the support in the community and the home is so crucial, because that's where we're failing within the big metropolitan. And that's why smaller community, the smaller LIN that have probably more integrated network are able to support the care of those compromised patients who are back in the community.
And that was really the work as well of Big Dot One in terms of the population health strategy. So if we can focus on caring for our patients as they transition through the continuum, we can avoid the revolving door of people coming back to receive care for things that we've already cared for them.
Why don't we take the next two questions together, Mike?
Which were the next two?
So the Toronto Western bed. So I'll make the promise, and then Mike will deliver. So once I can make any promise I'm on. I mean, I'm on my final days anyway. So
as CEO.
As CEO. So as the bed mapping exercise is being completed, it definitely includes a Toronto Western site. And the VP level have all seen the data. The program medical directors have all seen the data. Yes, there will be correction at that site as well. And the reasons why we are focusing the attention for the initial 10 beds is simply because this particular site has the highest number of midnight census of admitted patients in the emergency room. And so we need to do something with the Toronto General site, both in terms of pulling patient up and also in preparation for next winter to create a little bit more structurally sort of appropriate space to care for the patient. Whereas the Western site, at least, is going through the ED redevelopment, and so far the Western site is not under the same pressure, and that's why the priority for the 10 is here. But once the bed mapping is done, both sites will be taken care of.
Yeah, and I think practically speaking, we're really just phasing this as we look at it. We know that we have admitted patients in our EDs, and we don't want them to stay in our EDs for 24, 25 hours waiting for a bed. And so the first phase clearly was Toronto General. The emergency room at Toronto General is I would say undersized. The layout is not great. And we have a higher percentage of admitted patients in the ED there. And so it was felt that this was the immediate opportunity for us, and we had some funding available as a result of the management changes that we made that would allow us to move forward with this. As we complete the bed map, there will be further reinvestment, and we just are going to have to figure out how we're going to find the funding to do that, because it's not going to come from the government to fund this. This is something that we are going to have to internally identify. We will strongly advocate, but I'm not sure that we will necessarily get the money.
Can I just add something? It's Mary Kay McCarthy. Just to add, there are 10% more admissions, GIM admissions, at Toronto General than Toronto Western. And budgeted beds, there's about 12 more budgeted beds at Toronto Western as opposed to this site. So I think the move to open more beds here is, makes a lot of sense just from the pure numbers. So really appreciate that.
Thanks, Mary Kay.
So maybe a point about the 18 and 19 budget. If we are lucky, we get more than the 1% or so that we are using for our internal budgeting exercise. There's one or two things that can be done with that additional money. We can either put aside part of that additional money to invest in our digital transformation, or we can actually use it to actually cover the areas whereby we are not able to identify the cuts. So I think it's too premature. Until we know what we're funded with, then we will probably allocate it sort of accordingly. So we'll do the right thing.
So Charlie, I think as per the Oscars, the music would be playing right now if there were music. We've got a sign there flashing at us. And
1 o'clock.
We're not getting off the stage. We're going to keep going. So I don't know if there are any other pressing things that we can answer in 1 minute, but I think this has been great.
I mean, the other thing, like some of the other town halls that has been run, I think some of the question we did not get to or did not get voted high enough, I will call upon Matt from corporate planning to assemble and sort of record all of this. We'll share amongst our executive team, and then we would then sort of develop answer or prepare answer, and then maybe we'll post it. I think, Emma, we may need to update the website on the name of the patient partner. That has been part of the process all along. Okay, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, everybody. We should take these with us.
This is fun.
This is great, yeah.
Very good.
This is really good.